You're live.
Oh, I think we are. Yes, we are live. Thank you so much. Welcome back to another Monday edition of Parent Power Hour, brought to you by TDP, Teachers Democracy Project. So happy to have esteemed guests, Ms. Raven Cooper and Ms. Keisha Allen, joining us today as we discuss humanizing curriculum. Why in the world is that even a question? We're going to get to the bottom of that. But before we get started, we're going to have our connection question. This is a very selfish connection question, family. Thank you all for joining us if you have. And we are missing, of course, before I go any further, we're missing our dear brother, Tyrone, still under the weather, the face of the franchise. We really pray that he gets better and back ASAP. But this is a very, very selfish question. I've already asked our esteemed guests to think about this. The only way I can describe it is totally selfish because I got tricked into believing that we were into summer weather already because we had a nice little, swath of it. Then we went back to some, I don't know, winter, rainy typhoon. I don't know. So the question, family, is this. How soon do you think we're going to have consistent summer weather? I will not put our guests on the spot. First, I will go first. I think another month before we actually have some consistent weather. So we'll maybe the top of July, maybe June or so for that. Let's see, who would like to go? Miss Allen, how about you?
I hope it's not another month. I'm hoping for like 2 weeks. That's what I think. I think 2 weeks from now, that'll be the end of May. I think that's my guess, my prediction.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with the same. I was gonna say after Memorial Day when the pools open, but what I do think is we're gonna like in the next 2 weeks, but I feel like we're gonna have a long summer. I feel like it's gonna be warm up until like November. That's what I'm thinking. So I'm like, let me enjoy this weather before I'm like complaining of just the humid heat. So
Okay, fair enough. Good, great points by both of you, if I can say that. And fair enough, Ms. Cooper. I'll take warm through November over a early summer start.
yeah.
I'm with you there 100% because those fall and to me, not to be off on a tangent, but it seems like we've lost the fall. It seems like we're at feast or famine sometimes in terms of climate. That's another show for another day. But anyway, so glad to have you all here, and family, so glad to have you as well. Again, the topic is humanizing teaching, humanizing curriculum. Um, let's see, I'll start with you again, Miss Allen. Would you please introduce yourself and tell us about what you do?
Yeah. So hello everyone, family. I'm glad to be part of the family now. I am Dr. Keisha McIntosh Allen. I am an assistant professor at University of Maryland, Baltimore County. In that role, I am a teacher educator, so I prepare people who want to become teachers. I'm an educational researcher. My number one job is being a mother of two brilliant Black children. And I just want to add that, my goal as an educator and as a researcher is to humanize P through 12 education by engaging in research and teaching that transforms people, practices, policies, so that every Black, Indigenous student of color can realize their brilliance. So that's what I do and why I do it. I know you didn't ask me, but that's why.
I didn't ask you, but I'm glad you told us and enlightened us. And thank you so much for joining us again. Ms. Cooper, please introduce yourself and tell us about what you do.
Yeah, so my name is Raven Cooper. I am a kindergarten teacher here in Baltimore City, and I'm completing my 6th year in the classroom. So my first 2 years of teaching was in first grade, and the last 4 years have been in kindergarten. I am a proud auntie. I would brag about the little kids in my lives. And I also really love early childhood education, just anything. I feel like I'm still learning. And in a couple years after I feel like I've like really found my ground in kindergarten, I'm contemplating going to pre-K because I just love working with the little kids. I feel like their imagination helps keep me grounded and very hopeful for just like a future, right? Like they're not tainted by the world so much, and like these barriers aren't, there's no limitations in their minds when it comes to thinking about a world. And so I think that's why I really love working with the little so much. So yeah, that's a little bit about myself.
Thank you so much, Ms. Cooper. Dr. Allen, why are we even talking about humanizing teaching and curriculum? I think it is inherent in the question, but I think so often when we, and I'll put myself here, when I speak about rights, privileges, education, equity, it almost has to come down to that baseline, bottom line of humanity. Is sadly enough, but that's what I've noticed. When you look at it all, the baseline is, well, wait a minute, aren't we all human beings here? What is going on?
Yeah, I love how you framed that because we are all human. But the fact of the matter is that historically, Black, Indigenous, brown students haven't been treated as human within schools. They haven't been supported and welcomed as their full selves within schools. And so, for me, that's why I've been committed to humanizing pedagogies and talking about it for a long time.
Right, absolutely. Thank you. And what about you, Ms. Cooper? You said you're dealing with the littles, and it's so important the work that you do as a teacher. But I would probably say that, being a former educator myself, that you all in early childhood are a special group of people. I'm career middle school. People say the same thing about me.
I
I
think,
argue with them all the time. I know you probably do, and I
yeah,
disagree. You all, what you do to start them so young, to be able to not only bring out the best in their young intellect, but also to balance their needs as little children, to me is amazing. And I don't have never have had to pay. The thing is, I have little children at one time, but those are my children. It's different from
it's different.
teaching.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, it is. So tell us about your experience and your thoughts around this thought of humanizing teaching and humanizing curriculum. And there's no better time to start when the young people come into your realm.
Yes, yeah. I think it's been something that, just to echo a lot of what you said, Keisha, like we Black, brown, Indigenous students, like we have not had a chance to be seen as humans just historically. And so, coming in with a lot of that generational trauma, right? And recognizing that in the classroom, I think for me, to humanize teaching, for one, I had to humanize myself, if that makes a lot of sense. So it has been a special journey, and I recognize the privilege and access that I have in that, because I'm able to then ensure that my students are human. And it's still a journey, let me tell you. Because my first couple of years, I wish I can go back and redo them, but it wasn't me humanizing my students, right? I recognized, that there was a lot of things in education through my own experience that I didn't like, but somehow being a teacher in front of students, all of that still came out because that's all I knew. And being taught at a young age that you are a child, so stay in a child's place. And so doing that in my classroom. And once I recognized that I am worthy because I simply exist. So therefore, I need to teach my students that at a young age, right? When I think of humanized teaching, I think of the people, period. That's it. There's nothing else added to that. how can I meet the needs of the people in this room, the people in the school building, the people who are in this work? And one thing I think that's why I feel so fresh to teaching, because like, I'm like, oh my gosh, like as I do this journey with myself, I'm able to then, as I become more liberated, right, within me, I'm able to liberate the students in my classroom. And just even thinking about that this year, like I'm able to just recognize the importance and like what it means to meet my students where they're at, right? And like do away, yes, the standards and this data is great, but also this is a person in front of me. And this child came in not knowing how to write their name or knowing how to hold a pencil. Am I going to penalize them for that? No, I'm going to work with them and meet them where they're at and pour into them in ways where they feel valued as a person, not because of what they know. And that has been very important for me in my work. And as I continue to do this work, the more that I'm able to see that like my work does not equate my worthiness. And that is the same for my students. You deserve simply because you are here. And so that's been one of the things that has been making just my work feel really good. And why it's important, I believe, in the classroom and at a school level.
Thank you, Ms. Cooper. If I could just follow up, I have to. I'd be remiss if I didn't. You mentioned something that I found profound, and you said that you had to humanize yourself first. So that's really deep. But before we get to how you did it, why? What made you say, I need to humanize myself before I humanize my students? When did you? That might be another show, but you know, that's important because as teachers, one of the best things that we can do for our students and for ourselves is to reflect.
Yes.
And
Oh
it
gosh,
sounds
yes.
like a deep reflection to say, I have to humanize myself before I humanize my scholars. So two questions and that follow up is, when did you realize you needed to do that? And then how did you do that?
Yeah. So a big thing was my second year teaching. I felt like, well, my end of my first year and my second year, it was one of those things where I made this vision for myself to be this like amazing scholar, amazing teacher, amazing scholar of education. And I was that, like, I was like, oh, you're really great for a first year teacher because of the way that you manage your class, the way that you do things, right? And it was all the things I didn't like: yelling, control. When someone came into my room wanting to make sure that my students knew, you better represent me, right? Because that's important, that ego side of things. And also I was stressed. I was burnt out. I was doing school. I was staying really late for work, arriving really early. It just was not sustainable. And I knew I really wanted to do this and I wanted to make this career path work. And this is where the access and privilege comes in, of like having insurance and all of that. Like I was able to seek out therapy, and a lot of my sessions was talking about work, like everything work, and learning that, from a young age, we are taught that what we produce and what we do equates to like our treatment. And I should be, as an educator, treated as a human, because that's just the basic, not because of like, oh, I turned my attendance in on time, or I stay really late after school, or my data is amazing, it's stellar. I should have my needs met as a classroom teacher just because this is the work that I do, right? And I think once I recognize that my students don't represent me. I'm here as a teacher. I'm not here to make sure that my kids sit down and they're quieted so my principal can say, A+, you did great, right? Because I recognize I'm not here to control them. And the more that I was able to humanize myself, and it's a continued journey, because let me tell you, there's days where I'm like, right? But that's that reflective component that comes in, and the willingness to apologize to my class and say, yesterday, Ms. Cooper was really stressed. I had a lot of things to do and I took it out on you all, right? Recognizing that. And that's not okay. It's not okay to do that. And letting them be, and recognizing that I'm going to fall short and you're going to fall short. Monday through Friday from 7:45 until 2:20, you are not going to be the perfect scholar sitting in, like, I'm going to allow you the freedom to move, the freedom to like feel your emotions, the freedom to be like, you know what, I'm going to disengage for a little while because this is a lot. And then I'm going to come back when I feel like I'm ready. And I'm going to give you the space to advocate for yourself in that, because you don't want to be like me as a grown up trying to learn those skills because you weren't taught that at a young age. And I think that's was my main motivation, was like, not that I'm not messed up, not at all, but like having to relearn all of those things. I want to put that in you now. Our kids know so much. They have so much power, and helping them recognize that power in the classroom and being advocates for themselves and telling me, hey, Ms. Cooper, I'm not really feeling this right now. Can I take a 10-minute break? Yes, of course. Because you know what? I'll get you with this lesson again. We're going to, like, and I think that has been a big thing for me in this work. The more that I humanize myself, the more I can let go of that power, because my worth is not in power over my kids. It's in sharing that, if that makes sense.
It
And
makes
if I
absolute
could
sense.
just add to that and kind of lift up one of the things that Raven has beautifully articulated that I'm always telling to my own students is that the same systems that dehumanize students are dehumanizing educators. And that's what she's given voice to, is, in very particular ways, um, how she was being dehumanized by the expectations that various policies and practices were placing on her to carry out on her students. And so it's, humanizing work requires us to recognize how we're all interconnected and that the things that are happening to young people aren't just happening to them, they're happening to us as educators, but then also to their families. That's another level and another conversation.
Indeed, and thank you for that, Ms. Cooper. Thank you for your candor. I do hope your parents, your AP, your principal are watching, and you've invited them, because we don't hear from teachers, I think, often enough, that say, "Hey, I need to do some work in order for my children. I need to do some interpersonal work and thought and reflection in order for my children to excel in the classroom." So I do appreciate that. If they're not watching, take this clip and send it to them because it's important for them to know who is in front of them. Dr. Allen, so here's the thing. Before we have teachers like Ms. Cooper, who are obviously intrinsically motivated, and you have folks that are extrinsically motivated. A lot of people, I'm sure, you're an expert in knowing the kind of talent that you're placing in the classrooms and with the curriculum. How do you so two for you, Dr. Allen, how do you humanize a curriculum and prepare teachers to have that human touch when they go into classrooms?
Yeah, I think that it starts with me and what my classroom looks like. So, in the same way that Raven is humanizing her classroom with her little people, I'm doing it with bigger people, because it's hard to imagine and to do the thing that you've never experienced yourself, right? And so, how am I humanizing? So I start with that. How am I humanizing educational experiences for educators, whether they are preparing to become teachers or they're practicing teachers who are, seeking professional learning opportunities? So that's one, part of one answer. And so what does that look like? It looks like, in response to your question about humanizing curriculum, it looks like student-centered curriculum. What are the strengths of the people in the room, and recognizing and leveraging and building upon those strengths. It's recognizing the funds of knowledge and the community cultural wealth of groups of people who aren't historically thought to know and to have assets that they're bringing into the classroom. Our classrooms are very, Eurocentric, and so how are we really honoring the knowledges of Black, Indigenous, Brown people? It is recognizing that knowledge is co-constructed and that it's not static, that it's dynamic. And I just have to say, I'm really happy to be doing this podcast with Raven, because all of the things that she's saying that she's doing with little people is exactly what I do and what should be done with adults who are learning how to teach. I think also part of humanizing curriculum is helping students to critically read the world around them and recognize where they can, make changes. And then also what I heard Raven saying is, helping them to recognize that they have autonomy, that they can be self-possessed and self-determining and self-actualizing, all those good self things, giving them the space to realize that. A good humanizing curriculum does all of those things. As young people are learning content. It's both.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm sorry, y'all. My daughter just got in the car from track, but we roll on, we move on. So Dr. Allen, perhaps there are teachers that you're in your, in front of you. I mean, what do you tell them? Like, especially, I don't want to say especially non-Black and brown teachers when they're going into a Black or brown or Indigenous setting. Because the truth of the matter is there are some Black, brown, and Indigenous folks who, as many of us are victimized by this system, don't see anything wrong with some of the things that Ms. Cooper wrestled with: command and control, sit down and be quiet, stay in a child's place, so forth and so on. Now that doesn't, I'm not pretending that there shouldn't be order in the classroom, not at all. But there are ways of doing it. So how do you instruct all of your students, Dr. Allen, to go into a classroom and look at the children as children? And that just sounds so obvious, but it is not, because of the system. You look at the brown face and these tropes, I think, for some people come up, you know what I mean? So I'll be quiet. How do you instruct them, Dr. Allen?
Yeah, I think and I'm still working this out and figuring it out. But one of the things is helping folks to remember like what was important to them as learners and what's just important to them as just people. And so I was I was guest lecturing in a class that I normally teach, but I'm not teaching it this semester. And one of my colleagues began the class asking the students to complete the sentence. I feel loved by my teachers when, and they had to finish the sentence. Now these are adults. And the things that they said just made it so much easier for me then to talk about humanizing pedagogies, because love and humanizing, like, they go together. You can't, if you let me back up. I guess what I would say is that when someone experiences humanizing teaching, it feels like love. And so I think, part of it is helping educators to connect with like what it is that they desire, and pointing out that that's the same thing that Black and brown and Indigenous children want, and that their families want for them.
I think that's brilliant. I know I've thought about this too. How do you get, a new teacher or even an experienced teacher that doesn't have that human touch to realize it? And I think the relational familiarity, you think of someone in your family. Mm-hmm. Would you teach or talk to or deal with your family member, choose them, fill in the blank, the way you're teaching, dealing with, or talking to, little Data, or whomever that's in front of them that doesn't look like them. So thank you so much, Dr. Allen. Dr. Allen, I'm going to go back to you. You mentioned the fact that you're an educational researcher. Can you talk about how the pandemic shaped the need for the work. And, you know, I think personally that the pandemic and you know, really put a magnifying glass on our country and almost all of the aspects. Can you speak to specifically um, how the pandemic shaped, you know, the work and virtual learning?
Yeah. William, yes, you hit the nail right on the head, and that's what I always say, that the inequities that COVID kind of amplified were already there. Schools were already inequitable, and so COVID just, was the magnifying glass. Gloria Ladson Billings, who is an educational researcher and a teacher educator, she retired from University of Wisconsin at Madison. At the beginning of the pandemic, she talked about how um, young people were living through Black, Indigenous, Brown young people were living through, she called them quadruple pandemics. So there was, there was COVID, there was the racial unrest, and that, I mean, it's been happening, but the racial unrest in the summer of March 2020. I'm sorry, the summer of 2020. There is global warming. You alluded to that already, and the climate um, uh, issues, as she was framing as a pandemic. But then also the economic uncertainty that families of color experienced during COVID. And so, that was the context as people were focused on learning loss and quickly shifting to online learning. And to me, with my own students, I was thinking about what is it that they need, that all of us need, as we're, experiencing this major trauma. What is the learning experience? What are we to learn from this? And so um, that's my answer, is that and that's how I arrived at humanizing pedagogies, which I did not found myself. This was just an opportunity, another lens through which to understand um, how to humanize learning in a time of so much pain, and so much uncertainty, and in confusion, all the things. How do you, help students through this time and make space for them, and make space for their feelings? Um, yeah, so to me, it wasn't an either or. Also, I just want to add that in talking about learning loss, young people were learning in their houses. And so what are we saying about their households if we're framing that as learning loss, right? So instead of us thinking, collectively about how to leverage and build upon the knowledge that is in their household, we're like, how can we make this more like regular school, where learning only happens in the school building? And so, that's what my colleagues and I were interested in, figuring out with teachers like Raven and other Baltimore City public school teachers last year.
Thank you so much, Dr. Allen. And Ms. Cooper, uh, one of the groups that I know personally, I was like, how in the world are they going to learn and function? Are the littles, the primary children who were during the pandemic, I'll say the height of the pandemic, in front of screens or not, or parents were or not? It was a lot. So talk to us about that. I don't think we've had an opportunity to hear from an instructor about how that went and what are some of the strategies you employed.
Mhm. Yeah, well, when March 2020 happened, that was like us going from being in person to like a few weeks, like just kind of figuring out what was going on, and then, back into like trying to make things normal. And, it was into April, wrapping up the end of the school year. And I was like, there's not going to be any normal out of this, because I don't even know how to make sense of what's happening right now. So a lot of that time online was trying to figure out like stamina that the littles can have, right? Doing small increments of things, asking them like, what do y'all want to do? I wasn't really focused on a lot of like learning, I should say, like academic learning, right? We were still learning. Kids were having conversations with each other, showing, kids toys at their house and making those connections. And like Keisha, like you mentioned, there's learning happening, but not in the way that we like what's defined as learning, right? And so that gave me a glimpse once we learned that the school year was going to be virtual, and how to do that. And so, we were told to kind of hit the ground running and act like as if things were normal and give it a more formalized schedule. And I just said, I'm not doing this. Like, yes, I'm going to teach these, reading and math, but I'm going to build community, because it's very different, right? I don't have the ability to see your parents at after school to like joke or connect with them. I don't have the ability to see your siblings in the building. So a lot of it is through connection and being very, very patient and very, very graceful, because we are online, families are working, kids may not have had anyone in the home to help them log on. And I really push parents, like, I don't want to see you behind the screen, because you've done kindergarten already. I want to see your kids like making it joking, making it connection. If I heard somebody answer a question, I'm like, all right, was that your auntie or was that you? And so, I had one aunt, she would laugh and be like, okay, you got me, like, and really pushing them to see that your child can get this. And they're probably not going to get it the first couple months, because when we're online, give them some time, be patient. And also modeling that patience on the screen, because it took a lot. And using that first month as we went into the 2020 school year, 2020 to 2021, just building community. I really was trying to push for students to independently like work the computer without needing to call their parents. Leveraging families in the beginning, like, can you color code this? Because I swear to y'all, it's going to be easier when November comes, because now I can ask the students for your yellow math notebook, right? With the yellow sticker or the whatever on it, to build that independence. And then it came where I literally had one student, her grandma was like, girl, I'll be taking a nap and she knows when to log in. And before our conversation, we were talking about telling time. This student knew how to look at the time and know that at 10 o'clock I log in for reading. And all I got to do is click this blue link and I'm in with my teacher. And so really pushing parents, like, I know it's going to be pulling teeth, because that's how it is in the classroom. As a teacher, it's like, whoo, back to the basics. But I promise that once November comes, you will see the independence in your child. And I don't want to know what you know. And it's okay to hear your child struggle. I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to judge you. That's why I'm here. I'm here because when I hear them struggle, I'm not thinking about, oh my gosh, like so-and-so was struggling, like they parent not doing. No, I'm reflecting on my teaching. Cool. They were struggling with this. I need to do this next time. I need to pull a small group. So when you're helping your kid, it's not really helping me get better in my teaching. And I did a lot of recording too during that time. I recorded so many sessions, and I'll tell families I'm recording so I can go back and see what gaps I need, right? So I can look at a lesson. That's why they didn't get it. I didn't do a good job in modeling that, or I brushed past that. That's why they didn't get it, right? And so it was a lot of trial and error, a lot of grace, and a lot of patience. And community building was a big one. There'll be moments where my kids will log back on break and I can see it on their faces. They were done. I'm like, all right, y'all, if you're a caregiver, if your parents allow you to get a snack, we're just going to chill. We're going to, we'll get to this math lesson tomorrow, because you needing it today is not going to make or break your future. We're going to connect. We're going to laugh. And that was also a big time in my career where I learned it is okay to laugh. It is okay, right? Like, I had so many students actually come off of mute and, mama, I need a pencil. And in that moment, yes, I might be starting my lesson and that might have been disruptive, but like, we're going to laugh because that was cute. That was funny. And their mom, yelling back at them, like, there's a pencil, it was like those human moments of just like, it was family. And honestly, that was like that was a great group of kids. That group, because we spent so much time building community, building trust, and making mistakes. They see me log out the whole class and I'm like, oops, my bad. Like, damn, and we're laughing about it, right? And so that was one of those things that I'm like, okay, I need to make sure I take that with me every year into the classroom. So
Thank you, Ms. Cooper. And, unfortunately, a lot of the parents, a lot of the teachers took a lot of flack for those moments. I remember the district, certain folks in the district being really hard on the fact that parents were more involved in, helping the kids with answers, helping them with logging on and so forth. And some of that is natural, obviously, because they're not away from their kids, they're right there. So they're going to prompt their kids, and it's learning. We talk about humanizing students. Well, how do you humanize the student in front of you if you dehumanize the parent? You don't allow the parent to go. Everybody was a growth phase for everyone
everybody,
involved.
exactly.
And it was really disheartening to hear how, parents were spoken of, and teachers were, certain teachers, rightly, in my opinion, were not hard on the kids that weren't coming on camera or whatever the case may be. I mean, it was like you said, they tried to take the school and pretend like nothing happened, and it was just going to be just like coming to school from home, literally,
Yeah,
with all
yeah.
other aspects. So, thank you for that. Dr. Allen, going forward, what are the barriers in this work of humanization of teaching and curriculum?
Yeah, I think the biggest barrier is that decision makers aren't thinking through this lens, and so that competes with humanizing teaching, in the sense that if things are being said to educators like they have to adhere to the fidelity of the curriculum, and not centering what their students need right then in that moment, like what is a teacher supposed to do with that? And so I think that that's the biggest, I think, barrier, is that if school leaders, so administrators, if district leaders, if central office folks, if State Department of Education folks aren't thinking about their work and the work that they do as individuals through a humanizing lens, it just creates more barriers for educators. Is it possible for teachers to work, in that context? Yeah, it is. But I think about how much more powerful the work could be if we all were like moving in the same direction and had the same understanding of what education should be, and had the same vision.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. Ms. Cooper, what barriers do you see in your classroom to this work? Or
Yeah,
maybe not your classroom,
yeah.
but maybe some of your colleagues around you.
Yes, actually, what Keisha, what you mentioned is a big one. I think we spoke about that during the pandemic when I was in the humanizing course that you did, was having to adhere to this curriculum, right? Because it was like, we need to fill this learning gap. It was like this pressure, but also not recognizing that, like, I know what's best for my kids in this moment, and trusting me to find or to execute that for them, right? I'm not just sitting on my hands. And if I do something and that doesn't work, I'm going to find or go to another colleague or go to someone to help me figure out what it is to meet this child where they're at. I think that's one. And there's also like the barrier of like, what does a good classroom look like? I feel like even this school year has been like, there's been moments where an adult walks into my room and may see like students behind my desk, or students who are freely moving around. We have art time and I just don't allow them just to color. I have like they can get scissors, they can get glue, they can get popsicle sticks and create things in that moment. And sometimes folks make these comments of like, ooh, like, you're better than me, like it's a little chaotic in here, but it's like, it's to me like organized chaos. I sit back and I look at my kids just be very comfortable in their space. And sometimes even the pressure of that as a teacher, you feel like, okay, let me like pull in, pull it in, because I don't want to be judged as like not being able to manage my class, right? There's still management going on, but not in the way that that looks like the traditional way where kids are sitting in their seats, they're raising their hand each time to ask permission. That's also very exhausting to be overly policing my children. It's exhausting for me. And as I talk with new teachers, a lot of things too is just opportunities for them to learn and also to fund their life. And I think one of the big things that is tied to us getting raises is our like employee expectations, our formals, our performance. So our performance is tied to receiving a raise. But if you're a new teacher, you're obviously probably not going to perform your greatest. And I can say that being in my first 2 to 3 years, I wasn't performing at my greatest. And also I wasn't having my needs met because my livelihood, I was in survival mode. So I can't thrive in the classroom if I'm thinking about like, how am I going to make rent? Or my gosh, my student loans are like kicking in, right? If I'm thinking about survival, I'm not able to then thrive as a teacher. And then I'm not able to like humanize my students because I'm on survival mode, right? And I'm like, every little thing is ticking me off because these outside pressures. So I think those are kind of like the top 3 barriers that I would think of, is like pressure from admin, pressure to perform because that's tied to the money that we get, and just like not a lot of grace in this work, a lot of grace and trust.
I would venture, thank you, Ms. Cooper. I would venture to say now that this will be, I guess, this upcoming fall will be the second year after the COVID pandemic stopped schools from being in person. There's probably going to be less grace, unfortunately, from school systems, and probably more pressure. So thank you again for your candor. Miss Allen, excuse me, Dr. Allen, before we go, can you talk to us a little bit about culturally relevant teaching as a result of the Kerwin monies and just the Kerwin situation? We love this Kerwin situation, but it's hard for the implementation of what Kerwin suggests. Dr. Allen, please.
Yeah, I hope that I can do it justice. It's just, my understanding is that the expectation is that school leaders and educators will really be committed to culturally responsive teaching, and that it will be, I'm hoping that it will be reflected in teaching evaluations, and that an educator's movement up the career ladder, and then becoming distinguished or a lead teacher would require them. So who we count as experts within the field would be required to demonstrate their ability to engage culturally relevant and responsive teaching. Now, I say that though, my critique or my wondering or like my caution or, just I'm nervous to see how this rolls out, is because often when people think about culturally relevant teaching, they think of it as a practice, like just a toolkit, like, and you just like, go in your toolkit, oh, I'm going to do this culturally relevant thing and move on. And, and not really like Black kids, not really think that they're brilliant. And so, I keep saying, and it's not just me, folks who, do this work, who are researchers in this area, it really is a way of life. And so I'm just really, wondering, it's a way of life, it's a way of being. How are we going to ensure that it's not just, some practices, because really anything that you do can be culturally relevant or responsive, but it's your intentions behind it, and what are you thinking about the young people who are in front of you, and why are you using that strategy or that practice? So yes, I'm glad that it is going to be expected because of HB 1300. Yes, I'm glad. But I think that we have a lot of work from from teachers, from teacher educators, from administrators and central office folks, even MSDE. A lot of work around understanding what that mandate really means and requires of us.
Thank you so much. I totally agree with your points about culturally relevant, and it's a shame. Again, if all students were recognized as human, you would need to have something. You would need that tool because the young people could culturally, naturally be themselves, bring themselves, their ancestry, and their culture to the classroom without being questioned about it, without it being looked at as some kind of strange or odd thing. So thank you very much, Dr. Allen. Ms. Raven Cooper, thank you so much for your work in the classroom, and both of you in this field. And we have to have you back on again. It was an enlightening, intriguing conversation. Thank you all. And family out there, thank you for joining us today on Parent Power Hour. You just witnessed another wonderful show. Two brilliant people in this field, in this work, who now you know of, and now you can support in this work to help our young people achieve better in the backbone with curriculum and great reflection practices and strategies that would enhance their educational experience. So we appreciate you all for joining us, and join us again next Monday on Parent Power Hour. But for now, that is all. Take good care of yourselves. And I hope everybody here is right about the summer weather. Bring it on. See
Yeah, two
y'all.
weeks. Yes. Thank you so much. I appreciate this
Thank you for
opportunity.
having us.
Yes. Thank you for having us.